All right, in this video, we're going to have a bit of a discussion of a number of topics related to breakthroughs to further explain, and you might start to recognize that mostly in this video, we're looking to consolidate because in last video, we were looking more to have a breakthrough about a new idea, about breakthroughs and breakthrough stacking. All right, so when and where are breakthroughs needed? There's a pretty specific answer to this question, actually, which is if you're going to stack or build on top of something, then if it's blurry or uncertain, or if it's still giving you resistance, then you're going to want to eliminate that. So for example, if we get affiliates to promote for OMG machines, and let's say then we make 500 sales of our coaching, then if I say, all right, we're going to make 500 sales. We're going to try to do that. We just did that. We're going to try to do that every 6 months. So now I'm going to start to plan on that. I'm going to start to make sure we have the proper coaching for that, and basically kind of work on having the product that can fulfill that and so forth. So I'm building on the idea that we're going to have the traffic. And also, if we're going to have affiliates promote, then they're going to need it for us to get a certain level of conversion from potential customers that they send, or else they won't want to keep promoting. And so we're generally building our traffic on the idea that we can convert, right? And so that we can make the sale to a decent number of people. So you see there's stacking going on there, right? We're building one thing on top of another. We're basically building traffic on the idea that we can convert, and we're building our product on the idea that we can have traffic and convert, and yet we're also it's a little bit of, they all kind of depend on each other to a good degree too. That's how your business is going to work, where also affiliates won't want to promote if our product is particularly bad or non-existent, and it's going to be hard to convert people to a product that doesn't work as well, and if we don't have earnings reports and testimonials, that's harder. So if you have multiple places where you're going to want to have breakthroughs, then you just use your judgment and start with the one that seems most uncertain or that most things are depending upon. But you want to get to all of them because, again, if you're building on something, then it's very important that you get it very straight. If I make deals where I'm basically paying money on an ongoing basis to more coaches, and if they're also depending on OMG machines for, if they're kind of scheduling it in and depending on it in various ways, then I don't want to do that and then, or build that and then have it based on traffic coming in and have that traffic go away. On the other hand, if we tell affiliates that, oh yeah, you can promote, and that's implying that whatever sales they make, we'll be able to have a product for those people that become customers. And so we need to make sure, so now I'm building upon the idea that I can fulfill to customers, and I need to make sure that that's really broken through with. If you're having resistance in your life from personal relationships, then what you've done is you've built your career, in a sense, on the idea that, like, you've kind of stacked other parts of your life on to the idea that your personal relationships were there or going on and so forth. If those relationships are unsteady in some way, if they're causing you resistance, if there's lack of understanding there, then even though you didn't think that you necessarily built your career in a way on top of your personal relationships, that happened, right? If you're getting resistance or if one is affecting the other, then to some degree one is built on top of the other. They might both have kind of a feedback relationship where they both affect each other, where your relationships are a little bit built on your career working out. So we don't have to think of this exactly like in a vertical fashion where one has to exactly be on top of the other. But you can say that if one thing depends on something else, right? You can, there's plenty of things you can build where one thing depends on the other in kind of a horizontal fashion. For example, you might build up some clients that you're consulting with based on the idea that you can rank, but you might also be like basing your need to rank or the money that it might take to do some search engine optimization, some techniques you might want to put some money in, like some maybe buying some domains or paying for some software or whatever it might be. So one way or the other, if it's stacking, building, or any kind of relying or dependency on something that's giving you resistance or any kind of blurriness, which is a kind of a bleeds your creativity. It also makes your mind kind of intuitively plan for different possibilities, right? If there's different meanings, like we multiplied 3 times 3 times 3 before, about if we have too many potential meanings for things. Or if a girl says I love you, or a guy says I love you, then if you're building a relationship partly on that, then if there's blurriness there and what that might mean, then that's a problem. And so you want to eliminate that. And where do you focus on first? Again, you just tend to look at where it's having kind of a big impact on your life. And when you first start trying to take a look at your life and get it straightened out, then there's going to be often a bunch of places that might need this. And it's all right. Just start with one thing. You don't need to you get overwhelmed when you start multiplying these different possibilities, right? So just realize that it's best to be creative regarding one thing at a time. And you can be patient. And when you realize that you're going from breakthrough to breakthrough, it's just about, you think of one thing and you work to breakthrough on it. And you can sort of relax the time frames and the deadlines and the feeling like, are you getting stuff done fast enough? Because it's not really about speed, it's about the breakthrough. If you focus if you operate on a particular breakthrough in the most focused manner, then your speed is automatically going to be the highest. And if you think that you can just get along without having breakthroughs in life, then that doesn't make sense either, right? So you clearly need to have breakthroughs. You want to break resistance and blurriness in one area and then another area and another area. Or sometimes you're digging where you're trying to figure out one thing. Like if you're trying to understand what it means if someone says, I love you, then you might end up with some deeper questions, right? About who we are and what goodness is and what you do consciously and what you do subconsciously and so forth. So that's okay. We might need to dig and dig even deeper and dig further until we get to something solid. And I can tell you that you can get to solid ground in pretty much any area of life. I have a methodology for doing that. And either you can just do it, I can tell you that it's possible. And of course you can continue with me. We're on some journey together, most likely, where most everyone that I hear that starts with working on the law of implication, they want to continue. And I'm here with you. I keep making more videos. I've made a lot already. And I'm continuing to make more for you. And I have a tremendous amount of answers and about the things that recur most often, because there's things that all of us are in the same boat, and we're all kind of building our lives on, there's a lot of ideas or questions in common. And I've mentioned them a number of times, like what is consciousness? How do we interact with the rest of the world consciously? Who are we? Like, who are we really? How does our brain work? How do goals work in taking action? And how do we get results in life? What is goodness? What is faith? Does God exist? What's the nature of God? What's the nature of knowledge? Is it possible to have certain correct knowledge? How do we understand? How do we think, right, most accurately? So all of those issues are questions that all of us are building the rest of our lives on. How do we learn, right, is another one. And I've resolved a tremendous amount of that. And so I'll walk you through it. Just stick with me, and you can even put those questions somewhat aside. If you don't have a video from me on that topic, you could just kind of work in other areas of life that are more tangible and maybe more immediate. You could just kind of work on breakthroughs with learning and with your career are some of the places where it's most likely that you won't need some of the deepest stuff as much when it comes to personal relationships and trying to understand yourself and motivation and things like that. A little better probably to have my help with that. And my point is not that you can't figure it out. Maybe you can figure it out 10 times faster than I did. But even if you do figure it out 10 times faster than I did, it would take you a couple of years because I've been working at this for, around 20 years or so. And I had one particularly critical breakthrough regarding who we are and how we understand and interact with the world consciously, that if you don't have that breakthrough, then you're pretty much locked out of the rest. And so it's a little bit like, metaphorically, if I were to invent a microscope back, hundreds of years ago when they didn't have one, and if a person has done that, then it's not like they're smarter than other biologists. They just have a microscope, and they manage to have that kind of breakthrough. And then once they use that microscope, then they're going to constantly come up with discoveries and build on those discoveries and build on those, where they're going to have a whole body of knowledge that's correct that other biologists don't have. And it's not really because they're superior or not. It's just they had that one major breakthrough that led to a whole huge amount of stuff that they could build. And so you don't have to believe me at this moment or not, but that is what I have done, and that's why I'm in a position to help you in a very unique way. And if other people had figured out what I figured out, the fruits of it would probably be apparent in some way. And whenever I look at people who seem close and they're kind of major gurus and teachers out there, they have not. It's pretty clear that they have not figured out what I figured out. They don't have the microscope, so to speak, and so they're pretty limited in how they can help you. They're pretty much what they do is they maximize sort of the non-microscopic world. So again, I'm speaking metaphorically, but if you had brilliant biologists who didn't have a microscope yet, hundreds of years ago, then they could be a way better biologist than, let's say, I did invent a microscope hundreds of years ago. Just in this kind of fantasy story here, they might be much more brilliant biologists than me. They might be way smarter than me. And what they would use the only thing they could do with their smarts would be to maximize what could be known without a microscope. And so there's kind of a whole way that the brain operates and thinks that I refer to as like the law of association or successive approximation. It thinks by analogy. And the scientific method and all of that is the brilliant minds that talk about areas like I talk about with results and motivation and taking action and how to be happy in life or how to be effective in various ways. They're stuck maximizing in this area that is limited. It's very possible that if they had my breakthrough, they could figure things out much faster than I could. Maybe they could explain things a lot more clearly, but they don't yet have my breakthrough. I'm not trying to hide it from them, but they just don't know it and understand it yet, and they haven't built what I've built for years and years. I say all this just so that you have at least hearing from me what you can potentially get from me and what you have available. Of course, me saying that is not the same as you accepting it or knowing it, and there's no reason why you should feel certain that what I said is correct, but at least it opens you up to the idea. So this whole series on breakthroughs is going to be very helpful for you, but we're also a little bit limited in that I'm mostly sticking within this topic, and there's some deeper things that you may have heard me talk about if you've heard me other places, but in this video series here that I'm doing, again, we're staying kind of within a defined area, pretty much. But over time, if we stick together, we'll get deeper than this as well. And so, as we get deeper, it's very useful because it'll allow you to apply and understand what I talked about with breakthroughs even better than you'll be able to do just by me sticking to this topic and not going deeper. All right, so again, the bottom line with this topic about when do we need breakthroughs and where is, again, you're looking for when things are kind of coming up over and over in your life because you're depending on those things, like the meanings of certain words, like what does it mean if someone says I love you? Although, again, that's actually a topic where it's better if you let me explain it to you over time. And but also in your if you're building a website business, then you're going to want to really break through with your understanding of web business as a whole right? And a good framework for that is those three things I gave you: traffic, conversion, and product. And those are the three things that you need to fit together and understand well. A great product to have that is it. Free traffic is a good example of something a little bit more broad, which is offering web services. One of the places that I'm going to be taking OMG Machines is to the coaching, is to have more of a focus on some varied, diverse web services that you can learn and offer. We started with free traffic, and we continue to have free traffic as the major thing. Search engine optimization, particularly on Google, as the major thing, because it's such a great place for so many people to be, and it's so abundant. There's so many. There's just so much. The pie is so large, but it's only going to help people and help you if you have other types of web services that you can offer, either to add on to that, or some people just that it fits their personality or their skill set better to focus somewhere else. And so I'm going to be looking to expand on that a bit. All right, so when you have your breakthrough about your product and or about traffic, which is sort of one and the same, it's one of the nice things about the free traffic is that it kind of gives you both a product, a web service that you can offer to others, and it also gives you a way to get traffic as well. So it takes care of two of the three main parts of having an online business, potentially. And it also, those two parts also tend to be the hardest parts. Conversion is often the easiest thing. Unless the main problem that people will have, the main reason why conversion seems difficult is if you don't have a particularly compelling product or an offer, or if you're not getting enough potential visitors to your offer. Either you talk to them in real life, or they're coming to your website, or anything in between. Then it's good. Then you can really, if you're particularly great with conversion, then it can really help. I suppose what I said isn't necessarily perfectly right. I guess, and if you really shine at any one of the areas, like if you really shine at conversion, then it tends to make the other two easier. So I guess the more you break through in any one area, then you can build on that because it's very solid, right? So I apologize for what I said a minute ago about conversions the easiest. I'm thinking of Cotton's talk at OMG Live, and then Cotton will be training in the director's cut. And his process for conversion is so powerful, and it's just so compelling that it's so solid that it's so great for people because it can give you a breakthrough in that area, and then it makes your product and your traffic feel so much easier because you're building on something solid. So you can really have a breakthrough in any one of these areas and particularly get it solid, and then the other two become a lot easier. As you get more used to having breakthroughs in your life, and as you have a few, it's crazy. You just get a few solid, or even one really solid thing in your life, and you build from there, and it's really unbelievable how nice your life can be. A lot of people's issues in, let's say, their relationship is I noticed this for myself. When my career finally became particularly stable, which is fairly recently, because even when I was building OMG Machines for the first year and a half or so, it was all working out great, but it didn't feel like it was necessarily all broken through and stable. It turned out to have been, but I didn't know whether and we didn't really have the breakthroughs. It was all working, but we only really broke through where it's particularly a stable business for sure within the last 6 months to a year of me recording this, depending on how you measure it. But when you have that stability there, then it further makes it easy to be calm in your life and calm in your relationships. If you're kind of jumpy in kind of a little twitchy and nervous in your personal relationships, then maybe you've stacked your kind of sense of calmness in life on top of your career. And it might not be realistic to try to decouple those things and say, oh, it doesn't matter how my career is going. It might be better to have a breakthrough, right? You can't really have all parts of your life isolated. And, like theoretically, someone might say, oh, it doesn't matter how my money is going, or it doesn't matter how my relationship is going. and just think that try to imagine that each part of your life is just kind of exists separately, and each is kind of on its own little floor. But really, that's not what happens in life, right? Really, our life, different parts of our life are interdependent, and it's going to affect how you act in your relationships, depending on how solid your career is. I think that you want to accept that, and then again try to have breakthroughs and have solidity in different areas of your life, not just try to keep them all separate. As far as I can tell, you're pretty much just fooling yourself if you think that you can keep the different parts of your life separate. If your career is really causing you issues and you need to really put a lot of creativity into it, which makes perfect sense, especially if you're starting out a business, there's nothing wrong with that. You need to pour creativity in, right, to have a breakthrough. Then, but that's certainly going to leave you with less creativity to spend on your personal relationships. And that's just reality, right? You can't have it be otherwise. The answer isn't to limp along and sort of forever be not breaking through anywhere because you're unwilling to divert too many resources to one area. The answer is to not just keep putting out fires, but to divert even more resources to any particular area and break through. I actually broke through with my career kind of last in life. I first broke through kind of understanding-wise, with understanding kind of strategically how to operate in life and how to understand life in kind of a deep level first. Then on top of that, I stacked understanding how relationships could work, and personal relationships, particularly my main romantic relationship. So I figured that out, but I could only figure that out because I had figured out some deeper things in life first, and that enabled me to have something very solid and not blurry, and that wasn't giving me resistance in terms of understanding who I was and so forth, and how I thought and how brains worked. And I pretty much got all that. I built upon that, how to have a great relationship, and I built that correctly. And so that I was able to have, and I continue to be able to have a wonderful marriage that's solid and doesn't keep giving me resistance and taking creativity. And then next, I started to develop my career. Soon after that, a few years later, my career started to reasonably take off. And I really stopped, about 7 years ago, I really haven't encountered failure really at all for about 7 years, I would say, in virtually any area of my life. I've had some difficult moments, and definitely I've had to pour creativity into places to build things, but I haven't really encountered anything that could reasonably be called failure. Previous to that in my life, I'd had relationships fail, relationships I really didn't want to have them fail, and they did. Business ventures and things, some of them failed, some of them succeeded a bit, but I tried various things and that didn't work. But really, for about 7 years, I can't even think of any place where I've had particularly noticeable failure in my life. And the point there has nothing to do with that I'm so smart or great or wonderful, but that when you start to stack breakthrough on top of breakthrough and start to build solid thing on top of solid thing, then the variance that you're going to get is just not enough to have a whole traffic accident. Right, like a traffic accident takes maybe about 3 or 4 things going wrong at once, typically, for it to happen. You don't just have one unfortunate thing happen and then a traffic accident goes on. Normally, you're going to have kind of a dangerous intersection or difficult road conditions with the weather, and then you're going to have someone who's distracted to some degree, or habitually just not really paying attention to what other cars are doing, and then you're going to have a particular event where a car does something unexpected in kind of an unlucky way. I'm just speaking kind of roughly, but that's about what happens with a traffic accident. So if you drive in a way that you are particularly careful and when different road conditions, and don't even only drive when necessary in those conditions, or if it's an intersection that's difficult, then you particularly wait until it's very clear. And then if you're constantly paying attention to what the other car might do, and you're very alert that way, where you're not just driving as if every other car is going to do just the right thing, but instead you're looking for the worst case scenario pretty consistently, what other cars might do, and you're driving in a way that you're able to deal with that, then when a car does something unexpected or dangerous, you're pretty ready for it. I explain that to kind of triangulate in on an example of that's a little bit like how my life is structured. Now, even if you drive that way, you could still have a traffic accident, right? There could be something so ridiculous that could happen that you still get in an accident. And absolutely, I could encounter failure or disasters in my life. I'm not totally disaster proof or anything like that. I'm not like Superman, anything like that. But I got in a couple traffic accidents when I was a lot younger in my teens, and I haven't gotten in one, for a while, over 10 years. I haven't even gotten a ticket. I used to get a couple of tickets every year, pretty much, even in my young 20s. But then I stopped getting tickets as well. And so partly it's probably how the police filter. They're probably more prone to give tickets to younger guys. But regardless, when I say haven't had an accident in actually about 20 years, not 10. But the point here is that you could have a crazy type of disaster happen, but the day-to-day variables that come up, they are probably not going to cause you failure if you are operating in a way in life where normal variables are not going to be a problem. However, generally people's lives are structured in a way so that pretty predictable events that are unlikely, but that you have enough sort of somewhat unlikely things, right? If you have a whole bunch of instances where there's a 10% chance that it can go wrong in a particular year, and you have 10 or 20 of those things in your life, then something's going to go wrong, right? And people tend to live their life that way, and they tend to live their business life that way. And for the most part, I don't do that, and it's pretty nice. I hope it's very clear that I'm not bragging or being cocky or arrogant here, but that I'm just talking about a methodology and the results of that methodology, and including I'm stressing that I could run into a disaster that could take me out. I'm not failure proof. It's just that the fairly reasonably likely or even reasonably unlikely things are mostly accounted for. Okay, let's move on to the next line here. So this is very intuitive, and I think you're already enjoying this idea probably from the last video, and you can continue to notice how intuitive it is for you to measure your progress and your feeling of accomplishment in life, and your feeling of whether it was worth spending resources that you spent and so forth by this, checking things off, sort of like a distance metaphor of milestones, like you're walking along in life, and where you're kind of getting stuff done, right? That's like checking off boxes, and you kind of can go to bed feeling satisfied if you did check off a bunch of boxes. And particularly, I know it's pretty common for people to feel not that great about their day if they don't feel like they got a bunch of things done or they didn't check off enough boxes. And we particularly want to let go of this as when we're operating in this metaphor, and this is deep down, this is such a common metaphor for people. It's like they pretty much treat their goals in life as if they're walking down a path, and sometimes there's forks in the path. They have to decide which path to take, but they're pretty much trying to get to some place, and then if they expect certain difficulties or obstacles to come about, then that's totally fine. They come to them and they find a way around the obstacle. But if they don't expect the obstacle, then they feel bad. They feel upset and so forth. And I tried to figure out how to operate within this metaphor for the longest time, right? And finally I realized, and it just wasn't working. I would come up with model after model of how to sort of maximize within this idea of we're either traveling along a road toward a goal metaphorically, or the other thing we do is it's not like we're traveling with distance, but we're traveling in time, but in a way where it's sort of like distance in time, right? Our brain tends to have a way of representing time as distance, but it's like distance into the future. And so if you imagine building a website or building a house or building a business, you're not like traveling a physical distance like in miles, but instead you're sort of traveling through time and assembling a website and a web business. But it's still represented very much like as if you were walking a distance, right? But again, the distance is in time. That's why people talk about like the fourth dimension is time, because it's represented in the mind very much the same. And so there's really no difference. If you're kind of sitting in one place, like in front of your computer, but you're doing it over the span of weeks and months, building a website, then the same, almost the same exact metaphor applies, where you have expected things that are going to come up that are kind of obstacles, and if you expect it, that's not much of a problem. But if an unexpected setback or an unexpected obstacle comes up, then you're going to feel upset, frustrated, angry, and then after that, you might adjust and deal with it. And I would try to figure out within that framework that we take. Basically, we're like a fish in water when it comes to that framework of going through life and having goals. Meaning that we're so used to thinking that way, we don't even realize we think that way. We just do think that way. And so everything to do with goal setting has to do with navigating within that framework. And I would keep coming up for just years, like decades, really. I was working on how to figure this out. How do we deal most properly with the issue of goals, motivation, getting results, achieving goals, dealing with setbacks and obstacles and all that. And finally, intuitively, I was operating with this sort of breakthrough metaphor a fair amount, not all the time, but a lot. And that was why I was so good at strategy in practice. Like, practically speaking, I would just win at strategy games, and I would devise very good strategies, and my plans would work pretty well in life. But I would do it a bit intuitively, but I didn't quite realize what I was doing. And finally, I realized to have a completely different mental model, that we don't want to try to make the previous model work of measuring progress by distance or getting stuff done and how to deal with obstacles in life. Instead, we want a fundamentally different mental model, and that's what we're describing here in this video series of having breakthroughs. So in this incorrect but typical mental model, then regarding obstacles, sometimes people measure their sense of accomplishment by how big an obstacle they face. And so they look for obstacles, but they'll sort of go off the path to find an obstacle, or they'll just kind of put an obstacle subconsciously right in their own way and then overcome it. So in one sense, overcoming obstacles can really juice people. And in another sense, obstacles were treated as problems and issues and setbacks and things to be kind of feel upset about. And the interesting thing is either way of operating is not really effective or efficient or optimal, right? Right? Either feeling good about overcoming an obstacle, that is inefficient because you tend to go looking for obstacles or even creating them, kind of fabricating them, and getting upset or frustrated or angry and just kind of letting that. When people get upset and frustrated and angry, not only do they feel bad, which in and of itself is not nice, especially because it recurs in their life constantly. So if you feel bad about obstacles, then and unexpected obstacles, then you're predictably just going to have a lot of bad feeling in your life. It's not just a one-shot thing, right? It's going to keep happening. So it's going to lead to a lot of unhappiness throughout your entire life. And also, it's not very effective, right? While you're feeling that way, you're generally not operating in a very efficient and effective manner. So neither of those ways of dealing with obstacles was making sense, right? And so you'd get advice like telling people to sort of embrace these obstacles and overcoming things, and that would work a little bit better than feeling frustrated, right? Like getting kind of juiced by overcoming things is more effective than feeling kind of frustrated and stopped and kind of curling into a ball and getting upset. But I would notice that it really just wasn't that effective either. And I just couldn't figure out how to solve the question, as I mentioned. And when you just can't come up with the answer within a certain framework, then you want to look to break out of the framework, which I finally did. And so when you look at the breakthrough model, now we're reframing the idea of an obstacle completely, where we're not looking for obstacles, but we're not upset by them. We just understand that we're going from, as I mentioned, we're going from kind of breakthrough to breakthrough. So what we can come to understand is that kind of traveling along a certain distance, either spatially wise, like distance wise, or kind of often it's through time, right? Where we're sitting in a chair working on a website. We're not moving distance wise, but we're moving kind of through time, and we're building something. In either case, when there's not a resistance, then, and this is one of those places where understanding the duality or the distinction between yourself, between you as a conscious being and yourself, your body and your brain, can be helpful, but it's not entirely necessary for you to fully get that. But if there's no resistance, think about it. That means that you can just do those tasks, you could just kind of travel with no problem. It's frictionless, so it doesn't take any effort. It might take like motion, like your hands might be typing, your legs might be walking, but it's effortless. You're doing something all the time anyway, right? Your body and your brain is doing something. As long as there's no resistance, then there's no effort. And so it's fine. And so if we separate out that type of doing and taking action, that effortless type, when there's no resistance, and we don't really count that, we just understand that's going to happen happily, as long as we kind of pave the way by having breakthroughs, then all of that effortless, frictionless action will take place regardless. All right, so you don't really have to worry about it. You might sit there and your body might do it, but you're just kind of pleasurably in flow. So another way to understand breakthrough stacking is that you're looking to spend your life in flow, where you have this kind of effortless motion, but consciously, see, flow is something that your body and your brain do, and it's very pleasurable. They like that, all right? But it's not you. Consciously, you're looking to go from breakthrough to breakthrough, but it's this interesting interplay where you want the flow that happens when there is the breakthrough and the consolidation, but in order to have the flow happen, to be in a flow state, this nice state where time seems to disappear and you're just kind of acting in this kind of effortless, frictionless way, you can, most of your day can be spent that way. But then there's a way that you can focus your conscious creativity. In practice, you might spend a couple of hours in a day in this focused, creative manner, looking to have your next breakthrough, and then spend all the rest of your waking time in flow, right? And that pretty much describes my life. Then, and then if you encounter an obstacle, it's just an indication of where a breakthrough is necessary. But mostly I already know where I'm going to encounter resistance because I'm looking for it, right? I'm looking for where the resistance is happening in my life. And I'm proactively spending some conscious, creative time working on that breakthrough. And when I consciously am focused on one type of breakthrough at a time, and if you've listened to my creativity videos, and where I've talked about creative tension and talked about your subconscious mind and creative focus and so forth, then I'm touching on this right now again. If I consciously focus on one problem at a time and I intentionally try to keep other problems out of my mind while I'm focused on this. Of course, if there's some urgent problem, I need to deal with it. But mostly I don't have a lot of urgent problems in my life because I've cleared the way far out into the future, so to speak. But of course, if there's an urgent problem, then I just go take care of that. No problem. But it's not like day after day. That's not what I'm taking up with. So it might happen in rare occasions, but mostly I can look at problems kind of way out in the distance at this point, and I have one at a time, and I focus on it for maybe a couple of hours a day consciously, and then it's the only problem going on that my subconscious is working on, and the subconscious is very powerful. It's not even, I'm calling it subconscious for your benefit. Basically, your brain can either be immersed into one sort of problem that it's working on creatively at a time, or it's going to be split, and so it's going to be harder for it to have a breakthrough, right? Because when you want a breakthrough, you want to bring as much focus to bear. You want to have enough context and knowledge and reconnaissance and poking around so you find a weak spot where you can break through, and then you want that object, that vehicle, that battering ram that you break through with, or it might not be a battering ram, it might be like you're trying to jump and get escape velocity over a threshold, right? Either one is a valid metaphor depending on the situation. You want that to be as powerful a jump as possible, or the escape velocity to be as much of a push as possible. So clearly you want your brain to be working on one thing at a time, because if that power, that focus is diffused, if it's split, then all it's going to, you might just not break through in two areas because you're not jumping high enough, you're not achieving escape velocity, or you're not bashing through the fortress or the wall properly. So it never makes sense to be trying to break through two places at once. Clearly, you want to break through one at once. Like you can never go faster by working on two problems at a time in terms of once you look at it in terms of breakthroughs. Because you would just break through quicker on the first one anyway, and by putting all your resources into the first breakthrough, then you work on the next breakthrough separately. Even if there's two things that you feel like you have to break through on at once, it doesn't matter. Still pick one at random, even if you can't distinguish between which one's more important, doesn't matter. Just pick one randomly, flip a coin, work on that first, and then work on the next one after you break through. And there's never going to be a faster way to do it than that. So your mind has all this processing that's fully available as a resource while you're in flow. So you can be in flow, and it's this sort of conscious but not consciously creative. There's almost you can almost imagine, and this is basically correct. It's a little bit of a simplified model, but you can imagine that there's your subconscious mind, there's your conscious mind, but your conscious mind isn't conscious. It's just like on a computer. There's a bunch of processing that might be going on that have nothing to do with what shows up on the computer screen. And then there's processing in your computer that is related to what's showing up on your screen. But that processing that's related to what shows up on your screen, you can call that your screen processing. And you can call the processing that's going on in your computer that's not related to what's going on showing up on your screen, like your non-screen processing. Like it might be your antivirus stuff working in the background. There's a number of things that work in the background. And so the screen processing, the processing in your computer that's resulting in what's showing up on your screen, that processing itself is not what's on the screen, right? It's processing. So you have a conscious mind of what you're kind of currently paying attention to. So if you're in a flow state working on your website and there's no resistance, you're just kind of doing it and it's all working out, then that's your conscious mind resource, your attention. As long as there's no problems there, you're in flow, and it's not going to engage your subconscious problem solving. So your subconscious creative focus, I call it, or problem solving, that can be working on an unrelated breakthrough, all right? While you're in flow, doing something else, having fun, spending romantic time with your significant other, playing with your kids, working on your business in a way that you're not encountering resistance, that you're in flow. Or you could just be doing something yourself. You could be playing a video game, whatever. That's your conscious attention. Then you have your subconscious problem solving, and then separately, you have you as a conscious being, and that's another precious resource. You can, and that's where you're kind of you as a conscious being, you can particularly interfere and resist. This can feel a little bit exhausting fairly quickly. And change and work on what your mind is focusing on. You might spend about 2 hours a day sort of pushing and doing that, where you're kind of conscious, particularly consciously involved with your breakthrough. And then based on that pushing and asking, what you're doing is you're asking your brain to sort of clarify. You're kind of digging and saying, wait, that's not clear enough yet. That's not good enough. And pushing so that push that you're giving it, I'm being a little bit oversimplified here, but it's still going to help you to hear at least this generalization. That push where you can also describe it as you're kind of seeking to understand, you're seeking to understand what's true, what's good. You're not accepting blurriness. You're saying, no, that's not good enough. I want to understand that better. And that will open a space and open a question and where you are getting your subconscious problem solving to start working on that. And it's going to start giving you answers. Those answers may or may not be correct. When those answers come to you, if you have time, you can stop and work on them consciously. And you can push and dig. You can either check, because when you get an inspiration from your subconscious, it's not going to make you feel necessarily like you want to check it. It's going to feel like, hey, I got it, all right? And what you want to do consciously is either write that down for later, or write that moment, check it, apply that premise, use it as a premise, and think, oh, well, does that work in this situation? Does it work in this situation? Does it work in that situation? You do not and should not treat your brain like an oracle. Your subconscious problem solving, It isn't some mystical source that necessarily taps into perfect truth and just reports it to you. Even if it does do that, you're being irresponsible by not checking. Even if it does operate that way, you have no way of knowing that it's operating that way, right? And clearly your subconscious mind is not always giving you nothing but correct answers. That's ridiculous, right? Clearly sometimes you have impulses and feelings and conclusions that feel correct and that are not correct, right? You'll have feelings that aren't nice or that are counterproductive and so forth. So if your brain was some kind of perfect oracle that tapped into this nonstop perfect source of truth all the time and just delivered that to you, then you wouldn't need to do anything. You just kind of would get a nonstop flow of correct information and act on it, and and life wouldn't be a problem. You'd also essentially have no free will in that case. So you don't have to get too deep down the rabbit hole there yet. But you do need to consciously check over these inspirations, no matter how right and perfect and wonderful they feel. Check them over, because they'll sometimes be wrong, or they'll sometimes be partially right, or maybe they'll be blurry, where you think, oh, that might be right, it might not, and you should not be satisfied with that if it's important. And you need to keep on digging and going until you get to no blurriness. And that's possible to do. All right, I've done it in plenty of areas in life where people think you can't do it, but you can. All right, so I'm covering right now, I'm doing this whole discussion to talk about this idea of measuring, this default idea that we're breaking out of measuring progress by distance or getting stuff done. I'm also kind of end up talking about things like seemingly slow progress or frustration or setbacks. By understanding this model where your conscious attention can operate in flow most of the time, some of the time you're adding not just your conscious attention, but you're kind of pushing consciously in a way that might feel a little bit uncomfortable. Your brain might not like it. It doesn't want you to interfere or push it. It wants to just kind of be in flow. But the trouble with being in flow all the time is that you can flow right off a cliff, right? Or you can flow again. You can be in flow on a river, but the current is taking you the other direction. So you might be happily paddling away, but the current is taking you backwards or kind of nowhere, right? Or you might just kind of crash into a wall and you can't overcome that, and then you're frustrated. So it's not possible to stay in flow all the time, and you need to push and push your brain to have breakthroughs, or else it will tend to not. It'll tend to just kind of come up against an unforeseen obstacle, and then it'll try to flow, or it'll try to just flow around. It'll try to like jump over it or go around it, or it'll just kind of try to act as if, or it'll encounter resistance. If it encounters like a total obstacle, then that's one thing. Other times it'll encounter resistance and just decide to pretend like there's no resistance, and that'll keep adding up in your life. Or it'll encounter blurriness and it'll just say, "Oh no, yeah, I know that, I got it. All right, she said I love you, and I know what that means," but you don't. But you pretend like you do. So your brain does not have it right by default. It's not correct. It's not always going to be correct, and it's not going to operate in the most efficient manner, and it will push back on you, and you need to push back consciously and say, no, it's not okay to have blurriness. No, it's not okay to live my life and have this resistance and not try to break through it. And again, you will encounter resistance from your brain itself when you're doing that, unless what you can do is you can actually break through on that resistance that you're getting from your brain when you're diverting your conscious attention. And so that in and of itself is a wonderful thing, and a topic that I will hopefully get to as well. And when I say hopefully, I will definitely get to it. I don't know whether I'll get to it in this series, but I have answers for a lot of these things, or all of certain things. I don't want to say all of these things to imply that I know everything. Of course I don't. I don't have every important answer necessarily, but I have a tremendous amount of useful and important answers that are going to make your life much easier. And I say that so you don't feel like it's hopeless. We're in great shape. Just stick with me, and we're just in tremendously good shape. I would tell you everything in this moment if I could. By the way, I'm not trying to slow roll things or go slowly at all. I'm trying to go as quickly and as clearly as possible. So if it ever seems like you want more from me quicker, then I'm doing my best. Okay, and I'm always trying to do better. But the only reason I just obviously can't explain everything in the same minute. I would love to, though. If I could do that, it would be a wonderful minute, and nothing would make me happier. And then I could just go back into happy flow. I really can't be in flow very well when I'm explaining this stuff. Maybe at some point I will have broken through all the resistance where I understand how to explain everything very clearly to people, and where I don't have to really think about it. But currently I do. And so we always want to be in flow. I'd rather just right now go play a video game or chill out or spend time with my family where I'm just in flow. That's really always preferable. But I am trying, one of the big creative things I'm doing right now in my life is I'm trying to break through with overall being clear and explaining this as efficiently and effectively as possible and knowing how I'm doing it. And then of course on in individual topics, right? That's kind of a generalized breakthrough, but what you can do is you can break through on individual topics and so forth. And so I'm doing that as well, of course. And that's where I'm putting my creativity these days in most every case. I do pause from time to time, and I probably, I don't know, depending on the week, sometimes it might be 90% of my focus goes into things I need to work on with OMG machines. Other times it might just be 1/3 of my focus. But anything that I don't need to break through at this point with my OMG machines business, then I'm diverting into breaking through on understanding and explaining this better for you. And happily, there's not really a lot of other places in my life that demand creativity, and so most everything else is pretty sad and in flow. And also happily, OMG machines itself tends to take less creativity over time. As I record this, there's going to be a bit of a creative push over the next couple of months as I kind of work on the next upgrade for the coaching. But then I'm hoping that'll kind of be a breakthrough that ends up lasting for 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 years. And then I can just continue to put as much creativity as I can that's left over into law of implication and getting this out to you. Okay, so we deal with this idea of seemingly slow progress, frustration, setbacks, expectation of... I'm about to end this particular video, but let me give you a final little illustration or a little illustration that ends up also being a proof of how arbitrary and ridiculous this model can be of the normal model of traveling a certain distance through space or time, and sometimes encountering obstacles that we expect and sometimes not, and how differently we act, not based on the obstacle or the situation itself, but purely based on our arbitrary, which is like random. They're not exactly synonyms, but close enough. Our kind of arbitrary expectation of what's a setback or what's an obstacle and what isn't. So imagine that there's a place you'd like to go. Maybe it's kind of like a bar or I don't know, a supermarket or a coffee shop or something like that. And suppose that it's 5 minutes away from your house drive. Then let's say you think, I want to go to the coffee shop. And then you get in your car and you drive there, and that's no problem. Now let's suppose that someone hypnotizes you and makes you think that it's actually 15 minutes away. And then you drive and you find, it's only 5 minutes away, and you're pleasantly surprised. You feel good about that. Or let's say someone hypnotizes you and makes you think that it's right next door. And then you get there to go, it's right next door, and actually there's a new obstacle. There's a new kind of setback. Now you have to travel 5 minutes, not only today, but every day. And now that feels ridiculous. You're like, oh my goodness, that's an extra 5 minutes I have to spend driving that I didn't expect to drive, right? And you can particularly feel it if it's half an hour away, but you really love it and you go there often. If there's a place you go that's half an hour away, and you totally accept that it's half an hour away, but then if someone hypnotized you and made you think that it was next door, then you might think, oh my gosh, half an hour away, that's terrible, right? The exact same actual situation, purely based on an arbitrary expectation. When I say arbitrary, we can just set our expectation like through hypnosis. Let's just imagine that through hypnosis you could mess with your expectation about how far it was. We could just sort of set it at random points, and you would feel differently based on wherever we set that point. But there'd be no difference in reality, right? And so it shows how if we just expect something, and because people do operate this way in practice, by the way, you want to operate differently. You want to have this different mental model of breakthroughs. But by realizing other people deal this way, then be really careful. For example, if you have an offer, either, by the way, when you get in a relationship with anybody, romantic, personal, business, then you essentially have an offer that you're giving them, whether you realize it or not, right? This is how I'm going to operate. This is how I'm going to be. This is what you can expect from me. And if that offer turns out to appear differently in the beginning than it ends up being, then they're going to feel upset, disappointed, right? Like it's a setback, disillusioned. But if you just get the offer right to begin with, then you'll often still make the sale, but you'll avoid the problem of the person's expectation not being met, right? And then they feel upset. Like we have coaching, let's say once a week appearances right now from Greg and from Fletch. And that ends up being totally sufficient. They're fully ready to do it more often if necessary. But let's suppose and then that was fully sufficient in order to make the sale for people for plenty of people to join our coaching, our OMG machines, to become members. Let's just say though that I went back in time and I changed the sales letter to say twice a week. Greg's going to appear twice a week. Fletch is going to appear twice a week. I wouldn't need that to make the sale. Probably hardly make any more sales, if any. It's very possible I wouldn't make one more sale based on that. And maybe, who knows, maybe I make 10% more sales. I have no idea. But the interesting thing is, for all the people that would have signed up anyway, by going back in time and changing it, now they could be disappointed and feel disillusioned if Greg and Fletch are only appearing once a week. Whereas if I just said once a week on the sales there in the first place, again, I would still make the sale, but I wouldn't run into the problem. So it's kind of arbitrary or random from one point of view, but then once the expectation's set, then it can create a problem for people. The reason I stress this is because you don't want to run into this with other people, and you also can notice it in yourself, how you're feeling upset sometimes about an obstacle, and yet if you had just known about how it would have been different, you might have still made the same choice, but you wouldn't have been upset, right? And then you can start to see this kind of random nature of this, and that kind of arbitrary ridiculousness about how that works is another indication of why the model itself is flawed, right? There's something wrong there. And that was one of the indications I used to know for sure that something was wrong with the model, and so I needed to find a way out of it. Instead of trying to maximize that model, when you find an absurdity, like I just tried to point out there, with how an arbitrary expectation can lead to feeling upset or not, then where there's no difference in reality, and yet you still change whether someone's upset or not, that ended up being a proof to me where I knew that the model itself couldn't work. Because when I use the model as a premise, I come to an absurd conclusion, and what that shows is that the premise has to be wrong, the model has to be wrong. And so I look to break out of it instead of looking to maximize within the model. And that is a way of operating that is also in and of itself a very beneficial methodology, where if you see that a premise leads to an absurd conclusion, people, it's kind of funny, in almost every case in normal life, people will act as if the person who came to the conclusion, like their reasoning is wrong, instead of acting as if the premise is wrong. But instead, I understand that if you reason properly and come to an absurd conclusion, you're not the one that's being absurd, but the premise is wrong. And so you need to break out of the premise. That's another thing that it's good for me to explain in much more detail at some point for you. Okay, we will end this particular video here, and then we'll continue with the discussion in the next video with the rest of this slide.